Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for our pre-recorded Zoom presentation. This is for Thursday, June 23rd. And today I have Tyrone Montayre and JC Watson from Protect and Preserve Hawaii, or the Koʻolau Mountains Watershed Partnership. Sorry, excuse me. And they will be presenting Protecting the Forest to Protect the Region. So without further ado, JC.
Right on. Thanks so much. Yeah, my name is JC Watson. I'm the manager of the Koʻolau Mountains Watershed Partnership. I'm going to be co-presenting today with Tyrone. He's one of our awesome landowning partners. With some land holdings in lower Pia Valley on the eastern Honolulu side. So our presentation is going to be kind of split two ways. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys some background information on what the watershed partnerships are, how we fit into conservation here in Hawaii, and then that'll dovetail really nicely with Tyrone's presentation, which is more site-specific on the conservation actions that he's been doing on his lands. So anyways, let's get into it. First question, right? What is a watershed? Here in Hawaii, it goes kind of synonymous with an ahupua'a, but more specifically, a watershed is an area of land that catches rain. You can think of it as our individual valleys, each with a central stream and all of the little streams and rivulets that go into it. Similar to the picture that you guys see, you can kind of see two distinct watersheds that then flow into one more consolidated watershed. Throughout Hawaii, we have a number of watersheds. There's actually 10 watershed partnerships statewide. We all kind of fall under the umbrella of the Hawaii Association of Watershed Partnerships. But all in all, it encompasses about 2.2 million acres of watershed statewide. That's about 50% of the land falls within watershed partnership boundaries, which is pretty awesome. Here on the island of Oahu, we have two watershed partnerships, the Koʻolau Mountains Watershed and the Waianae Mountains Watershed Partnership. Each of our respective partnerships have varying numbers of landowning partners, associate partners, and collaborators. For KMWP specifically, we have 18 different landowning partners and 10 associate partners. To be a landowning partner, you need to have within your land holdings 100 acres or more within the conservation district boundary. Some of the other islands that is a little bit different, Molokai, for example, basically anyone who has any amount of land is free to join the partnership. Yeah, but we're statewide, and KMWP is just one of 10. So for those of you who haven't been up in our more Mauka regions, this is kind of what it looks like in the pristine areas. This is really the epitome of a healthy Hawaiian watershed. It's a multi-stratified forest. You can see there's a canopy up above. In the wet forest, it's largely comprised of ohia lehua trees and koa trees and other canopy species. And then we have a middle story of ferns and shrubs, and then an understory of smaller ferns and mosses. Watersheds in Hawaii, and especially our native forests, are very, very efficient at capturing and storing groundwater. They've evolved over millennia to coexist in very close-knit communities with each other. And what this means for water is, as it rains, the water is slowed down. First, it intercepts those ohia trees I talked about. Then it falls on top of the ferns, then it falls on top of the moss. And this reduction in speed really helps to allow the water to absorb efficiently, as opposed to running off and going into the stream, which ultimately leads to the ocean. So if you're thinking about what it takes to recharge an aquifer, which is where we get our fresh water, basically an natural underground storage tank, and I'll get into that a little bit later. It takes time for the water to percolate down into those subterranean layers where border water supply can pump it out, and we can all have fresh drinking water. And a part of that process, like I said, is the slowing down of the water, and our native forests are very, very effective and efficient at doing that. So part of our mission is actually to protect these watersheds. In addition to the hydrologic benefits of intact native forests, there also is a biodiversity benefit. So you can see here some of our native flora and fauna. Here in Hawaii, we are one of the endemism capitals of the world. And endemism is basically a meaning that the species found in Hawaii, or a lot of them, are found only in Hawaii and nowhere else. And more specifically, we can even have island-specific endemics that are like only found on Oahu. We can even have mountain range-specific endemics. There are species of plants and animals that are only found in the Koʻolaus, or even only found in one ridge. And if in the case of some of our land snails, like in the top right over there, some of them may only be found in a single tree or sub-valley on one ridge, in one mountain range, on one island in the entire world. And these species really rely on intact native forests in order to continue existing. I mentioned a little bit about the island-specific endemics. So a couple factoids you guys can take home with you are that there are 179 plant and animal species found only on Oahu, which is great. We actually have 3 species of Ohiolehua, which are found only on Oahu. So in addition to the common Ohiolehua Metrosideros polymorpha, we also have, this is from top to bottom, Metrosideros tremuloides, Metrosideros rugosa, and Metrosideros macropus. And then, unfortunately, with these levels of endemism come lack of adaptation due to no predators. For example, we don't have any feral ungulates, any native cows or pigs or goats. So when you have predators introduced to a landscape, you have threats, and thus Hawaii is also the extinction capital of the world, and 21% of our species are threatened or endangered, and many of them are actually extinct. This is what a severely degraded watershed looks like. This is actually from Maui. We could probably find some similar photos here on Oahu on the west side, but back in the days prior to watershed conservation efforts, there was a lot of land use change that occurred in the forms of deforestation, sorry about that, kind of unsustainable ranching, and this leads to basically a landscape that looks like this, where there's no vegetation left to hold the soil, very little trees, very little anything. And what that means is when it rains on this type of landscape, the vast majority runs off into the water. So there's very little recharge happening. Over the long term, that means the aquifers can become depleted, meaning that we don't have any fresh water to drink. When a landscape is this degraded, it is very, very difficult to repair it. It'll take generations for this mountain to become covered in trees. Historically, this mountain on West Maui would have been a music and dry forest environment, lush with plants and animals and a stratified canopy, and very, very effective at capturing and storing water. But at this point, this one is pretty far gone. So with the watershed partnerships and the Hawaii Division of Forestry and Wildlife, our goal is to prevent the watersheds that are currently healthy from getting to this point. And this watershed probably only got degraded in about 200 years. So it doesn't take all that long for them to get to a point of no return, but it would take much longer to get them back to being healthy and productive. This is actually a photo from Nu'uanu Valley here on Oahu in the early 1900s. This is kind of the post-ranching, pre-end of sugarcane era. You can see there's literally no trees left. What the first territorial forester, Ralph Hosmer, actually quoted was that in Hawaii, our most valuable product of the forest is water rather than wood. Due to our geographic size, and we rely on the water, well, due to our geographic size and the isolation our location in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, we need water in order to survive. Without water, even if there was lush forests, human habitation would be impossible. But yeah, anyways, a little more context for this photo. This is kind of that post-ranching time period, and the early foresters and the sugarcane plantation owners at the time noticed that once all the trees were cut down to make space for cattle and goats and sheep, which basically just ravaged the landscape and were running wild, they noticed a severe drop in the water availability. Streams and springs were drying up, and wells that they used to pump water for irrigation were actually drying up. So that kind of spurred the very first forest reserve program, which then later snowballed and evolved and actually became the DLNR. So it's pretty cool that, you know, our Department of Land and Natural Resources actually came out of a watershed conservation initiative back in the early 1900s. To combat this, the early foresters of the time conducted mass forestry plantings and research. So essentially they went around the world and gathered up the fastest growing tropical and subtropical trees and plants that they could find, and then planted them on a massive scale across our watersheds, effectively, you know, repairing them, but also inadvertently introducing what we now call invasive species. Since that time, you know, DLNR and the watersheds have evolved, and the primary mission of, rather than, you know, planting whatever kind of trees we can find, has transformed into watershed conservation and protecting the resources that exist, and repairing the resources that have become degraded. And I'll get into the specifics of kind of what these on the ground actions look like. But you can see here, you know, it's some native outplanting, some ungulate control, fencing, priority weed surveys, and of course, incorporating the next generation into the conservation efforts. A little bit of comparison on what a non-native and a native forest looks like. You can see here the one on the left versus the one on the right. The greener one on the left is the native forest, and the strawberry guava forest on the right is invasive. You can really see the difference here. The native forest is, you know, very lush, high biodiversity, meaning a lot of different plants and animals coexist and thrive. You have that ohia canopy. You have that mid-story of ferns and shrubs. Then you have that understory of more shrubs, ferns, and then finally the ground cover of mosses and tiny ferns. Versus that non-native strawberry guava forest, you can see, is basically just strawberry guava and leaves. So when it rains, rather than capturing the water, the strawberry guava forests actually lose a lot of it to runoff. Those leaves are highly mobile, and underneath them is just dirt. So all of that can wash away into the streams, which gives us brown water advisories, and it goes out and, you know, smothers the coral reefs and all of that, reducing, you know, near shore fishery abundance, and all of the associated effects of that. In addition, plants like strawberry guava are actually really good at losing water too. So evapotranspiration is a term that basically means the amount of water that a tree loses through its foliage, through its leaves. And compared to a native forest, a strawberry guava forest will lose up to, you know, 29% more water in wet periods and 53% more water in periods of drought. So even when it's dry, strawberry guava is literally evaporating water that it's taking from the ground and putting it into the air versus storing it and allowing it to remain in the aquifer. Also, you can see the strawberry guava bark is very smooth versus the shaggy moss-covered bark of ohia. That may not sound like a big deal, but here in Hawaii, we actually receive a fair amount of our recharge from fog intercept. That's when you look up at the top of the mountains and the clouds are sitting up there. Well, what's happening is all of that cloud moisture is accumulating on top of the moss and the ferns, and it's dripping. It's slowly dripping down. And so I believe the percentage is approximately 29% of our ground recharge actually comes from that fog intercept, whereas the smooth-barked invasive species like strawberry guava really don't capture any moisture at all from the fog. So very, very important to maintain our native forests as compared to letting them transition to grasslands or invasive habitats. Okay, so now to get in a little bit more detail on KMWP specifically, these are the two ranges on Oahu. Like I said, we have the Koʻolau and the Waianae range. The Waianae range is on the leeward side of the island. It's a much older volcano, kind of steeper cliffs, more crumbly rocks. It is higher than the Koʻolau, but it does receive significantly less rainfall because the Koʻolau range acts as a rain shadow, or the Waianae range is in the rain shadow of the Koʻolau, with our predominant, northeastern trade winds laden with water from the ocean. They get up our beautiful cliffs and then rain down. So that's kind of essentially how the hydrology works in the Koʻolau. You can see here, this is kind of an analysis of where our native forest and alien forest types exist. All the gray and white is basically no data. You can see that the vast majority of our native forest is restricted to those upland Mauka areas. And that's basically what this looks like. Our forests and our native forests are really up there in that top band, up by where the clouds are. Once you get down to the lower elevations, the forests are pretty well invaded, and then below that you have the urban sprawl, where there's very, very minimal forest at all or canopy cover, and the impervious surfaces really reduce the groundwater recharge that would occur there too. To put a dollar value on everything, about 90% of Oahu gets their water from the Koʻolaus. It actually gets pumped out all the way to Waianae, and the central Koʻolaus actually produce and provide water all the way to Hawaii Kai and Waimanalo. But in economic value alone, it's estimated somewhere between 4.6 and 8.5 billion dollars, and that's due to the drinking water that is consumed and the irrigation water that is consumed coming out of our mountains. The value of the habitat, this was a hard one to put a number on because how do you put a price on a rare and endangered species? But with aesthetic value and the metrics that the UHERO program put up at UH, it actually did this analysis. Anyways, that comes to $567 million. The aesthetic value from tourism was estimated at 1.8 billion. So that means the total value of just the Koʻolau Mountains alone on one island is 7.4 to 14 billion dollars. So really a lot to lose if our forests are, allowed to become severely degraded, not only with the water, but with everything else. So yeah, now into KMWP specifically, our mission is really about partnership. So what we try to do is foster landowner collaboration to perpetuate the water resources on Oahu by both protecting and enhancing our forests of the Koʻolau and their invaluable native ecosystems. And a forested watershed is incredibly valuable. A native forested watershed is even more valuable, and that's what we try to protect and restore. Like I mentioned before, we have a number of landowning partners. So our partnership encompasses approximately 110,000 acres. 17 different landowning partners, 10 associate partners. Basically all the major landowners in the Koʻolau have joined in. We were first founded in 1999, so we made 21 years old this year, which is pretty exciting. And the KMWP itself is essentially a voluntary alliance of all these landowners that came together under the initial guidance of the state to commit to doing more than nothing. All of these lands are actively protected because they are within the conservation district boundary, but weeds and invasive animals, they don't know boundary lines and they don't really care. So, no action is still in action. And over time, these forests will naturally be degraded if, you know, pigs are allowed to completely uproot and destroy our Mauka ecosystems, and invasive trees like Albizia are allowed to rapidly grow and overtake and outshade everything. But yeah, that's basically who KMWP is and kind of where we operate. More specifically, you know, we have a kind of a prioritization scheme because we can't operate across 110,000 acres. The KMWP support staff program that I manage there's only 10 of us. So, you know, 110,000 acres for 10 of us would stretch us a little bit too thin. So we had to prioritize our management units. And how we did that was looking at the combination of average rainfall, which you can see here is centralized in the north central Koʻolau, annual recharge, which also coincides with where the most rain is. And then we're created a prioritization scheme. Now we, you know, essentially 110,000 piece of the pie. To give you a little bit more background on where all of our aquifers are here on Oahu, you can see they're here. This was provided to us by the Honolulu Board of Water Supply. But really the main one to focus on is that Pearl Harbor aquifer right there in the middle. That's the primary source of all of our drinking water here on the island. You know, 165 million gallons per day is the estimated draw on it. And if we go back, our priority area actually sits pretty much right above that and is the direct feed into that watershed. So how do we protect these watersheds, right? I mean, the main things are we protect them, we restore them, and then we educate. Protection via watershed fencing, restoration via invasive species removal, and native outplanting when necessary, and then education. Education because, you know, as I mentioned before with that really degraded landscape slide, this is a long-term commitment. Operating on a hydrologic and biological scale is much faster than, you know, growing crops. You know, if you plant a tree today, it's not a mature, healthy canopy tree for many, many years. So it's very important to educate and empower the next generation of conservation stewards because they need to be ready to hit the ground running when I retire. I hope to retire at some point. I got many years ahead of me, but I do know that will have to happen inevitably. So we need to have the next generation coming up behind us. A little bit more detail on how we do our operations, you know, fencing, all of these watershed fences that we've helped to coordinate the construction of really occur in very, very inaccessible locations. So that requires helicopter operations, sling loading the materials in, and then a lot of manual labor clearing the line and pounding in the fences. And then once we build them, we always have to check them and maintain them. It's not a set it and forget it situation. You got to go up and make sure that after a big rain, you know, landslides didn't occur, which would essentially break your fence, and then all the pigs that were not in there can go in. Yeah, and then we control weeds along the fence line as well. Then comes the ungulate control. Once a fence is built, we want to remove the ungulates, primarily in the Koʻolau, that is feral pigs. And we do this in a very scientific manner through aerial surveys, lots of reconnaissance. We will deploy game cameras well in advance. That way we understand the movement of the ungulates and we can get those removed as efficiently as possible. We also, to the best of our ability, employ strategic fencing to allow the ungulates to actually move out of the unit prior to it being closed. An example of that would be you don't finish the fence until the guava in the lower elevation is fruiting, and then the vast majority of the pigs will actually move out of the mountains, and then you can close the fences. You can also construct one-way gates, and then use community hunters to help utilize, clear the unit. And then after that, it's up to staff. Then we proceed with weed control. These are the target species that we have in the Koʻolau, kind of from top left to right, we have Psidium cattleenum. That's the strawberry guava. Then the next big picture on the right is Manuka. That's a New Zealand tea tree that was introduced during those forestry plantings. Some of what we do requires rappelling. You can see rope work, then manual removal, which is a lot of hand sawing and hand pulling from the team. All of these areas require helicopter access, which is actually the most efficient way of getting up there. Some of them we could hike to, but it would take 2 days to have the crew hike up there, and then do a day of work, and then 2 days to hike out, and that's the whole week, versus a 12-minute helicopter flight. And then in the bottom right, that's a beautiful native species. I couldn't just have a whole slide with invasives, so I threw that one in there too. That's an endemic cyanea. Some of the worst invasives that we have here on Oahu. This one you guys might have seen, especially if you've hiked the Manoa Falls Trail. This is mule's foot fern, or Angiopteris evecta. This is a native fern to kind of northern Australia region. It's actually endangered in its home region, but here in Hawaii, it's very invasive. You can see it creates this really dense canopy and these massive fronds. And what that means is the ground cover, as you can see, is completely shaded out, and it's essentially just dirt. So a lot of our really wet valleys are being threatened with this species, and they can basically transform the whole back of the valley into looking like this, where it would be just this fern and dirt. Another one is Tibucina herbacea, or cane tea. This one is very prevalent on Maui. There's a small population here on Oahu that KMWP has been working in collaboration with the Oahu Invasive Species Committee and the Division of Forestry and Wildlife to control for a number of years. It's kind of located in the central Koʻolau area, and we're hoping to get this actually eradicated so it doesn't spread to other parts of the island. It forms really, really dense stands and basically shades out everything that would be in the understory. And finally, albizia. This was one of the forestry plantings as well. Widespread plantings occurred in 1917. So it's been in Hawaii about a little bit over 100 years. It's a very majestic and tall looking tree, but it is very problematic. In Hawaii, it's the fastest growing tree in the entire world. It can grow up to 15 feet a year. With this fast growth comes a phenomenon called sudden limb shear, meaning that the structure of the branches and the trunks are naturally very, very weak. So they will drop their branches without warning, no wind necessary. And then in high wind events, like Hurricane Azelle that hit Puna a number of years ago, they can cause massive damage, blocking roads, putting down telephone lines, injuring people, killing people because the branches smash everything they land on. Yeah, this is a really bad one. On Oahu, we have about 20,000 acres. A lot of our wet valleys are inundated with albizia, but it is possible to control it, and the main thing is keeping a handle on it. So if you guys do see it coming up in your yard, it's best to pull it immediately, because you do only have about a 2-year window before it gets tall enough to require someone with a chainsaw to cut them and cut it down for you. Now into a little bit of the light at the end of the tunnel, the outplanting, right? How do we repair these degraded landscapes? What is the feel-good stuff? And at KMWP, we try to do a lot of outplanting. This is from one of our dry forest sites where we've been outplanting natives and essentially turning a low biodiversity dry scrubland into a native biodiversity. So anyways, outplanting is a very, very important part of lower area restoration, basically revitalizing these degraded watersheds, and planting, native canopy species, native mid-story species, and then native understory species is all part of that. And it's a transitional process that, is going to take some time, basically building a forest from nothing. But it's highly effective, and it is pretty much the only way to get our degraded landscapes back. And it's also a great way to involve the community. The majority of our outreach areas are accessible, so people can hike to them. or basically just drive up to them and get out of their cars, and there they are. So yeah, if anybody's interested, we, well, at least in pre-COVID times, we had volunteer events that occurred 2 times every month. But hopefully we will be able to start up again with those at some point soon. So just, yeah, check us out on our website if you want to get involved. And these days involve, you know, can really involve anybody from, you know, civic clubs to school groups to just anybody who is interested. And you get out there and you plant some native plants and remove some invasive species. We also try our best to attend events and present at, with hosts. Yeah, whenever we can, get out to just spread more awareness about watershed conservation and native plants and the importance of our native forests. So where do we kind of fit in with other larger sustainable initiatives in the state? Well, a number of years back, Governor Ige put out the Sustainable Hawaii Initiative, and there's a number of ways to get our state more sustainable, such as doubling local food production, biosecurity, marine management, renewable energy, agriculture. But then the one that really is important to us is the 30 by 30 Watershed Protection Plan, which essentially entails us protecting 30% of our priority watersheds by the year 2030. This is what that looks like statewide. So there are kind of 2 designations of priority watersheds here in the state, priority number 1 and number 2. So that's the red and the orange. Yep, and then the watershed partnership boundary you can kind of see as a hash over that. So essentially what that means is by 2030, we want to protect, additionally protect all the areas that are in red here. So you can see that that's only 30%, which leaves another, 70% that could still use protection, but at least we're on the right track once we achieve these goals. And we're actually looking pretty good here on Oahu, and the other islands are looking pretty good too, to be on track to meet that goal. There's a number of very large fencing projects in the process of being construction and or completed right now statewide, which is pretty exciting. That's pretty much it for the KMWP portion of things. You can check us out at koʻolaupartnership.org, find us on Instagram at KMWP Hawaii or on Facebook. So without further ado, what I'm going to do now is turn it over to Tyrone, and he can start talking about Protect and Preserve Hawaii and the awesome initiatives that he's doing over in Pia. And yeah, Tyrone, just let me know when you're ready to go to the next slide, and I can click it through for you.
Okay. You're good. Aloha. My name is Tyrone Montayre, founder and president of Protect and Preserve Hawaii. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to making a sustainable Hawaii through conservation efforts, working with the community, and of course, educating our keiki. We're also land steward to a 330-acre parcel. It's zone preservation. It's called Pia Valley. In 2018, I was graced and humbled with the opportunity to bid and win this parcel at a city and county auction. Pia Valley is a narrow elevated leeward valley located in eastern Oahu, nestled behind New Valley, in between Wailoa Ridge and Kulepia Moa. Pia Valley is, the higher regions of Pia Valley extending from Wailoa up to Koʻolau Crest and Hawaii Kai are part of the State Hawaii Natural Air Reserve System. It's considered a critical habitat. There are 29 rare species found in the area. Pia Valley once flourished with robust populations and rare endemic indigenous flora and fauna. Next slide, please. One of them is the Oahu elepaio. It's an endangered endemic bird to Hawaii. We have them on Kauai, Hawaii, and Oahu. Each are their own subspecies and also have their own song. Pretty cool. Next slide. These are some of our endangered and critical species, the Polycius legidiae and Euphorbia anartiana. This is the Popala, found only in New Valley and Wailupi valleys. That's why you can see it says Niuensis at the top, so it's pretty special, and it's in and around the Pia Valley area. Being a large landowner, it's even a larger responsibility. To be honest, I was freaking out. I was hoping to win like a studio, not something like this. I'm just an average Joe, auto technician at the Tony Group, not some developer or venture capitalist. So I started doing research, particularly on preservation, zoning, and getting lots of insurance. Then I started talking to residents of the area, and it was a good feeling to know how much of the residents in New Valley actually cared about their community and the land itself. So it just so happens, many of the new residents are actually in the conservation field as well. I also met with different organizations in conservation and people that acquired large parcels of land. And, trying to find the right fit, a good steward, someone to restore it, and have it for the community. I came to the realization that there needs to be more conservation-minded land stewards. Then I knew it had to be me. So it was my chance to give back to the land and have a chance to have a place for the community and for the Keiki to learn, our future leaders. I soon met with JC, and shortly after speaking with him, I became a landowning partner with KMWP. It was a big weight off my shoulders, being in an organization that had a lot of experience with exactly what I was trying to do. You can go to the next slide. This is just a view from up on Kulepiamoa Ridge, which borders Pia Valley. As a landowning partner, we get to meet up and discuss conservation-minded practices, as well as share ideas and resources, and of course, get expert advice from JC and the KMWP team. Next slide. Along this journey, many new friendships and partnerships were made. A strong group of advisors from the area, ecological and cultural, just to name a few: Doug Harper from Maunalua, Chris Kramer from Maunalua Fish Pond, and Elizabeth Riley from Livable Hawaii Kaihui. Initially, I didn't choose conservation, it chose me. And none of it would have been possible without meeting all these great people. And because of them, in 2019, Protect and Preserve was founded. Multiple ecological surveys, meetings, planning, and the initial management plan was formed in 2019. Here you see us doing an ecological survey with resident Miles Thomas on the left and Chris Kramer on the right in the orange. Next slide. Here's a site visit with the Waldorf students. Actually, some of them were actually pulling some of the guinea grass and koahale away from some of the native species. Next slide. So in 2020, we worked with the UH&RM students, National Resources, Environmental Management. They helped us to refine our management plan, and then a contract with the Department of Agriculture, also known as NRCS. We signed a contract with them to restore 1 acre, and also partner with native ecosystems for 1,000 trees. So this will be ready for this coming planting season. And also with Line Arboretum, which will be also propagating some plants for our outplanting. Our current but pending plans to start in September in the dry area near the beginning of the trail, just around 1 acre of dry land forest. So We'll be making 50 to 60 hotspots or kipukas, selectively clearing invasives, as some will be utilized for shade till the native keiki can grow. Once established, then we'll put ground cover. We're hoping for 3 separate events a month. One will be using the KMWP field technicians, and second, educational visits with the surrounding schools, and then lastly, probably one Saturday of the month, hopefully third Saturday, we want to do like a volunteer event with the community. Next slide, please. And these are some of the plants that we will be out planting. So the ali and the wili wili. Next slide, please. And mahalo for your time. If you want to reach out to us, or if you want to get any updates, IG or Facebook at Protect and Preserve Hawaii, or you can reach us on our website at protectpreservehi.org. Mahalo.